So this class is Hinduism, Vaishnavism and Hare Krishna. We can kick off with what is Hinduism. Hinduism is a misnomer. It's only a word that's been around for a few hundred years. And in terms of Hindus, people from India, calling each other Hindus, that's only about 150 years old. Hindu is not, it's actually like Australia or America. It's a location designation. It was basically given by the Persians and the Muslims. Everybody on the other side of the Sindhu River was called a Hindu. Now, that's not a big deal in a sense, but if you try to understand what is Hinduism, the problem is it's not one religion. It's heaps. And they're totally different. It's practically, India practically had, unlike in the West and unlike in the Middle East, India had religious freedom for thousands of years. It doesn't matter what religion you belong to. It's like in Australia today. We can practice here, and there can be, like there's a mosque in town, there's a Sikh temple in town, there's a bunch of churches in town, and everybody gets along. There's kind of mutual respect and some understanding there. So like that, pagan Europe also had that before Roman times, before Christianity. In India, you actually have religious freedom. So when you say Hindu, what you're actually referring to is practically every different type of religiosity known to man. You have tantrikas, you have Wiccans, you have black magic, good magic, you have mystic powers, you have yoga, you have Mayavadis, Brahmavadis, Shaivites, Nagababas. Anybody ever seen those guys naked with tridents walking around in the snow, hardcore? They're Nagababas. So many different things. What we will do is, I was selling books one day in Palmerston North at that university. I was talking to one young fellow who'd just come out of a Hinduism class, and he was telling me that his teacher was explaining the same point, saying that Hinduism is the umbrella religion, presumably meaning that there's a whole bunch of different things going on underneath it. So, if you go to university and you study world religion or Indology or something like that, the general idea is they'll say, sometimes they say 2/3, sometimes 3/4, sometimes 70%, something in that kind of range of Hindus are Vaishnavas. Like you have this word Christ and then Christian. So as a Christian is like, what is that? What do you call those? Declensions? What do you call it when you get a word from another word? Whatever it is. Christ, Christian. Vishnu, Vaishnava. Vishnu is a name of Krishna that means the all-pervading one. So even though, up until very recently, you will hear in Western universities, being Western-centric, that the great gift of the Middle Eastern religious traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, was monotheism. Actually, you have monotheism in India, predating all three. It's this, it's a little bit Western bias. Like when I was brought up in America, I was just telling somebody yesterday, we actually didn't study history, we studied American history. And we only studied American white people history. We didn't study about American Indians, and we didn't study anything else from anywhere in the world. Why? Because that's not important. We're from the United States, USA, and that's all that matters. This kind of nationalism thing sometimes gets a bit provincial. And we're losing that now, and for many of you, you're growing up in a different world, a kind of global world, but it hasn't always been that way. Like the Greeks, they had a word for foreigner, and the same word meant barbarian. Just one word. Anybody who's not Greek, obviously they're barbarians, obviously, because they're not Greek. So you have this kind of concept, and a little bit like that, that's how the name Hindu got planted. We don't care what you are, we don't care what you do, we don't care what your culture is, whatever. You're over there, you're Hindus. And similarly, the Western study of Hinduism has been a little bit Western biased. I saw a documentary last night from the BBC on Britain, BC, it was called. You're from there, right? BC? Well, no. And They were saying what we learned from the Romans is that the Romans brought roads, brought currency, brought a single language, brought civilization to Britain. But actually, as more and more evidence is revealed, that's not the case. They had roads, and they had a culture lasting 10,000 years. And some of their architecture was quite amazing. They had a civilization, they had roads, they had governments, they had laws, they had currency, they had a language, a sophisticated language. They actually had a whole civilization there. Something like the American Indians, perhaps, who knows. And then the Romans came in. Actually, even Julius Caesar himself tried to conquer Britain. For 100 years, Rome, like at its peak, Rome, you know, the stretching all the way from France all the way around, or from your point of view, all the way around down into Syria and around into Egypt. So a huge empire, you know, the Roman Empire, for 100 years tried to conquer Britain and couldn't get anywhere. So even militarily, they were powerful in the BC. So that's a whole civilization there, but we don't learn that. We learn that Rome brought all the good things. So, like this, we can, if we want to be truly neutral, truly scientific, truly a seeker of actual knowledge, a seeker of actual truth, sometimes we have to step out of our culture and step out of our century, step out of our gender, step out of our nation, step out of our religion, and see things from a broader perspective. When we look at Hinduism like that, we see, at least according to modern scholars, that most Hindus are Vaishnavas, which means they're monotheists. Their core literature is Mahabharata, which is considered the great epic of South Asia. It's the largest poem in the world. It's sort of like this epic, like Lord of the Rings kind of thing, you know, this epic kind of romance and heroism and mystic powers and, you know, nations conquering nations and all that kind of stuff. You know, courage and honor and blah, blah, blah. Good guys and bad guys. So it's basically a span of time, maybe 200 years, about 5,100 years ago, and it tells the history of South Asia at that time. Dynamic sort of dynastic struggles and, you know, broken hearts and lost love and mystic powers and great warriors and all this kind of stuff. So that is the great epic of South Asia. It's called Mahabharata, and it reaches its peak in a little part of the Mahabharata is Bhagavad Gita, which is the most famous text of South Asia. So you have these kind of core texts, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, Mahabharata, and also you should probably include Ramayana in that. Ramayana is about the ideal princess and prince and their romance and their life together, becoming king and queen together. That's Lady Sita and Lord Ram. And practically if you go to any kid anywhere in India, even today, you just say, hey, tell me about Lord Ram. He'll just start telling you heaps of stuff. It's still there in the culture after all those thousands of years. Like we have archetypes in our culture. Like we have like Merlin or Romeo and Juliet or great warriors, great leaders. We have these kind of images, and when they reverberate through the centuries, and children and then their children all hear the same story, it starts to create archetypes, like the tragic love of Romeo and Juliet. They had true love, but their families were fighting, and why couldn't the families see past all their politics and everything and just let us be? And in the end, it fell to tragedy, and they... anyway, like that. We have these kind of images in our mind, anti-authoritarian images, all sorts of stuff. So in South Asia, they have Sita and Ram, the perfect princess and the perfect prince, honorable and beautiful and courageous and noble and all these things. Anyway, so if you think Hinduism, think a whole huge culture area with all sorts of things going on. But to simplify it, the main core is this Vaishnavism, this monotheistic tradition. There's Radha, there's Krishna, there's all their incarnations, like Lakshmi Narayan and Sita Ram and so on. So the core literature, again, is Ramayana. You can see one up there. Bhagavad Gita here. The Bhagavatam, and I don't see a Mahabharata off the top of my head, but also Mahabharata should definitely be mentioned there. And these are mostly about Krishna and Krishna's incarnations and Krishna's devotees. So from Vaishnavism, you get all these branches coming down, teachers to students, and then one of those students becomes a teacher, and one of their students becomes a teacher, and you get these kind of chains, these big branches coming down of disciplic succession. In Sanskrit, they call that parampara. So the Hare Krishna movement is one of those. It's a Brahma, Madhva, Gaudiya Sampradaya. A branch starts with the big branch, a Brahma branch. That's a person many thousands of years ago. He spoke that to Narada Muni. Narada Muni spoke that to Vyasadeva. Vyasadeva spoke it, coming down for thousands of years. And it's called the Brahma, Madhva, Gaudiya Sampradaya, because out of those all other branches came. So in that way, the Hare Krishna movement is delineated. It is just straight up, old school, core, essential Hinduism. If that word, of course, is a misnomer, but it still gives you that idea. This is the core ancient tradition of India. That's why, hey, Jue, that's why you'll see every Sunday and on festival days, all the Indians come. Because for them, for the Indians anywhere within 100 k's from here, they just see this like church. You follow me? They recognize this. Oh, this is a Radha Krishna temple, just like at home. They don't see it as something different. Just like my parents are Christian and they're Baptist. So when we would travel, go to Africa, go to India, go to America or whatever, my parents would find the local Baptist church and they would just go. Because it may be a little bit different, but basically there's Jesus, there's the Bible, there's a minister, they're singing songs, Amazing Grace is probably there, Shine Jesus Shine or something like that. And it's recognizable, this is what they're used to. So that is why on Sundays and festival days, all these Indians come, many of whom we've never seen before. But for them, this is just like at home. This is Radha Krishna, like that. The Bhagavad Gita, the main text of Hindus, is spoken by Krishna. It's basically Krishna giving the synopsis of the philosophy of life. The Mahabharata is about Krishna and his cousins, the Pandavas. The Bhagavatam is about Krishna and his devotees and avatars. Krishna in the 10th canto, the biggest canto, is there, his whole life in 90 chapters. From when he was born all the way through growing up in Vrindavan, leaving for Mayapur, leaving for Mathura, and then Dwarka, like that. So this is, anyway, the beginning of the Hare Krishna movement. In terms of philosophy, what you're looking at is monotheism, but with a slight difference from what we're used to. They do not have the idea of a paternal God figure, like a father God. They don't have that idea. They have an idea of a romantic, young, beautiful couple. Even logically, in terms of science, in terms of nyaya, or logic, study of logic, there is the understanding of causality. Like if I push this drum, it's not going to explode, it's not going to burst into flame, it's not going to go flying that way, it's not going to disappear into a parallel universe, it's probably just going to fall. Do you follow me? There's just normal causality in this world. Like if two bunnies have sex, you don't get a freight train, you don't get a black hole, you don't get an elephant, you get little baby bunnies. You follow me? So the idea is there that when you see in this world, if this is the result of someone, if we accept temporarily that this is a creation of someone, and you see masculine and feminine everywhere in this universe, isn't it? Masculine, feminine, yin and yang, it's everywhere in this universe. Therefore, in the cause of this universe, there must be feminine and masculine. That's the idea. And they see God as the all-attractive one. Young, beautiful, funny, expert musician, artist, intelligent, witty, kind, merciful, sweet by nature. They see God like this. In fact, even in the histories, or if you don't believe them, in the legends of, say, the Bhagavatam, even sometimes somebody might be like some enemy of Krishna. Not that Krishna is thinking like that, but they might be thinking like that. Some envious person, some real rascal, and they come to fight with Krishna, they come angry, they come to kill. And as soon as they see Krishna, they kind of go, whoa, he is good looking. And then they remember what they're doing there and they start fighting. That's a normal thing that repeats in the Bhagavatam. So this is the image of God in South Asia, the divine couple. So you always see Radha Krishna, Sita Ram, Lakshmi Narayan, like that. Girl and boy. One, just like a couple is one, like a married couple, that's one thing, but also different. Two individual persons, but harmonized in love. One together. So, the basic philosophy is, that's Radha and Krishna, and we come from the spiritual world with them. We come from what the Christians might call the kingdom of God. We are eternal, divine beings, pure, perfect, happy, and we have somehow or other come into this world and are having a human experience, and many other types of experiences in this birth and death, birth and death, birth and death program. But we come from that place, what they would call Gokul or Krishna Loka, come from the spiritual world, and in order to explore some lower pleasures, we've come down here to try this. And the sort of great adventure of life is to gradually learn that no matter what you do here, there's some fun stuff, there's some not so fun stuff, but it has a limit. And no matter what happens at the end, you'll die and have to change. So at the end, people, thoughtful people, Atato Brahma Jignasa, they come to the conclusion that, well, maybe let me go home. Like that. And that is then yoga. Yoga means how to link back to that divine world, link back to Krishna and go home. So, in 15 or 16 minutes, that was the synopsis. Hang on one second. You can leave it for now. Is that okay? That was my attempt to explain Hinduism, Vaishnavism, and Hare Krishna. Is it okay if we do the questions with this on? We could always just cut it there. Cool. Since you've been here, if you've had anything, not you, Lucky, although you can ask if you want to. If you've had any question, why the hell do they do that? What's the meaning of life according to Hare Krishnas? Why do they shave their head? Why do they wear those funny dresses? Why do they get up so early? Whatever. If you've had any questions, hit me. Why do they do that? We got to... Oh, I'm sorry.
So I was just wondering, it's a pretty general question, but what are the main defining characteristics of Hare Krishna which separate it from other sectors of Hinduism?
The other sectors out of Vaishnavism will be very different, because some people want different things. According to Vedic philosophy, for example, every single planet has life, full life, like here. But they're just different, they're situated differently according to dimension. Like a human being will look at the moon and see craters and dust. But if you have the right type of consciousness, you will not see like that. You will see forests and rivers and people and castles and I don't know what, all that stuff. You'll see the whole thing there. The analogy is, you seen a lotus flower? The lotus petals, they sit one on top of the other. So the analogy is the moon is like that, or any planet is like that, but there's different levels over each other. And this is the same idea that Muhammad has in the Quran, same idea that the Greeks had, multiple levels to the universe. In other words, the earth is one place, but there's actually 14 levels here. There's actually many different levels of consciousness here. Even in a very pragmatic, real way, we can be in this room, and some of us can be experiencing a very different reality from the others. Even amongst humans, we can be like that. What to speak of all these billions and trillions of little microbes and bacteria and ants and whatever else are in here. And perhaps higher living entities also, who knows. So this is the concept that every planet has life, and every planet has a different kind of variety of experience. So from their perspective, from the Hindu perspective, who is thinking like that, believing like that, they may choose to go to this planet or some other planet, and there's different yogas, different processes for going there. Or they may want to develop mystic powers, like magic. So they go up into the Himalayas and they sit in some cave and they practice Ashtanga yoga for, their whole life, meditating 20 hours a day or whatever they do, undergoing huge austerities. There's all these different things for people who want different things. So from the Vaishnava perspective then, which means a monotheistic tradition based upon Radha and Krishna being like what we would call God, and the idea, the goal of life is to go back home to the spiritual world. In that sense, there are some differences, but they're mostly external, mostly not so important. Dress is different, rituals are different, maybe the language is different, maybe the prayers are a little different, but not much difference at the essence. In fact, you could probably stretch that to other monotheistic religious traditions also. Something like that when Jesus, what we spoke of on Wednesday, when Jesus sort of summed up the entire Old Testament, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your strength, and love thy neighbor as thyself. That is just straight down the middle, essential Vaishnavism. Straight up. That's it right there. So I think you see some unity in the monotheistic traditions of the world, even though they talk in different languages and dress in different ways and have different rituals, and one's a church, one's a temple, one's a synagogue or whatever, but a lot of similarity there. There are some other differences in order to connect easier to a Western audience, because we are mostly our little branch of that tree. We have about 500 temples, and who knows how many restaurants and farms and other kind of centers. But we'll do things like this, for example, what we're doing now. We'll sing Hare Krishna with guitars and just talk about this stuff. Whereas if you go to India and visit some temple, you'll get the same thing, but you'll get a very culturally different. The music will be very different. They'll be talking in a different language, wearing different clothes, eating different food, usually super, super spicy. And those little red chilies? Little story from when I was in India? They're hot ones, like the killer hot ones. The ones that if you take a tiny thing of, your eyes water. I had this little kid sitting next to me. I was sitting in a rows and rows and rows of people, maybe 5,000 people. And because I was not in the usual place where I ate, I just joined in with them. So I was definitely the tallest person out of those 5,000. I was in West Bengal, and I had this little kid here, and they served pakoras, which is like 20 of those chilies in a ball, dipped in batter and fried. Man! Like I took one little thing, and like my nose was running, my eyes were running, I was just going, holy cow. And this kid was looking at me, just eating them. No problem. Anyway, so maybe be a little careful with that. Different culture, essential, a unity in the wisdom, a unity in the essential wisdom. And some people focus on different of Krishna's incarnations, like there'll be Ram Bhaktas, or Hanuman Bhaktas, or different personalities like that. Anything else?
What explains the hairstyle?
In India traditionally, it's not important, that's a good one to start off with. In India traditionally, a person could be identified by how they look. So you could look at a girl and you could see she's married, she's not married. Kind of like we have that ring, but a little bit more ostentatious. You can tell if her husband's home or not. You can tell if she's a widow. You can tell so many things just by looking at them. So in that way, somehow or other, they just had that culture where you're kind of like out in the open, whatever you are. So in that way, somehow or other, the monks, not other people, but the monks, they would shave their heads and keep that little ball of hair, which I don't have, a sika. Or like Ashtanga yogis that have that kind of Rastafarian look with they call them dreadlocks, but then they wrap them up. It's not important and not to get worried about. It's just like a cleanliness thing or an easiness thing or an identification thing. I think probably for the yogis, you're living up in the Himalayas, you're in some cave, you're alone most of the year, so it's just easy to do the dreadlock thing, or, if you have a blade, it's just easy to shave up every now and again.
And miss out the part of the back.
Yeah, that's tricky.
Is it a common age in Tennessee? Is it a common style?
Maybe.
Just not able to shake their head.
I got my answer.
Anybody else? Okay. Take it on. We've got We have a few minutes left. So, do you want to do a kirtan with me?